करके भी आपको दिखा देता हूँ, इसकी आवाज़ भी आपको सुनवा देता हूँ। इसे हम क्लिक करेंगे। ये जो लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग हमने सेट की थी हमारे चैनल पर, यहाँ पर चलने लगी है। इसकी ऑडियो भी आप सुन सकते हो।
6 subparts of Article
इसी तरह से मान लीजिए आप चाहते हो कि फेसबुक पर कोई वीडियो है या फिर कोई लाइव वीडियो है, लाइव इवेंट है, उसे आप लाइव करना चाहते हो अपने यूट्यूब चैनल या फिर अपने फेसबुक पेज पर, तो उसे भी आप इसी तरह से कर सकते हो। आप यहाँ देख सकते हो, मान लीजिए ये
वीडियो Article 370 and 371 is more or less the same, and so therefore what your lordships will hold in this matter either way, will have implications on Article 371, and that is what I am here to respectfully point out. Your lordships, the Constitution of India, in addition to being a politico-legal compact, also served as a national security instrumentality in terms of unifying the periphery of India to the hinterland, because national security is not merely the use of the hard power of the state. Your lordships, when the British were ruling India, they actually managed the periphery through a process of treaties. And since there is a paucity of time, I will not lead your lordships through the various treaties in the northwest and the northeast of India. But independent India decided to manage its periphery, its realm, through constitutional guarantees. And the reason is because they were managing an empire and we were building a republic. And that's how Article 370, which applies to Jammu and Kashmir, which is a periphery state, Article 371, the 6 subparts which apply to the Northeast, and the 6th schedule of the Constitution, which applies to Assam, Tripura, and Meghalaya, becomes relevant and germane in this matter. And may I very respectfully point out, your lordships, that even a slight apprehension
वगैरह चलाना है, कुछ भी लिखना है, वो भी आप लिख सकते हो। तो मैं यहाँ प्लस के बटन पर क्लिक करूंगा, उसके बाद यहाँ पर टेक्स्ट,
and your lordships are currently dealing with one such situation in Manipur, and I will not belabor that point further. Before I come to the Northeast, your lordship, I just wanted to point...
I'm sorry for the interruption. Kindly give me a minute indulgence. And I have instructions to say this. But we have to be very, very responsible in assisting your lordships, and we must understand the difference between temporary provision, which is Article 370, and special provisions with regards to other states, including Northeast. The central government has no intention to touch any part which gives special provisions to Northeast and other regions. This submission would have a very potential mischief, and therefore, Lord, I am interrupting and making it clear. Let us confine to a temporary provision for Jammu and Kashmir. Rest are special provisions, not temporary provisions. So there is no apprehension, and let us not try to create that apprehension. I am not putting that apprehension at rest on behalf of the central government.
Your lordship, may I very respectfully point out, I was not referring to the current central government. I was referring to the principle at stake.
So why should we deal with anything in anticipation or in apprehension? We are dealing with a specific provision, namely Article 370, which was applicable or is applicable according to you to the Jammu and Kashmir. We don't have to really expand this ambit on what the impact of our interpretation would have on other provisions of the Constitution.
Your lordship, may I respectfully point out...
There is also another thing in what he says. This is a special provision, 370. 370 is stated to be a temporary provision. Of course, the councils have argued it is not temporary, that it was temporary in the context of a assembly. All those aspects are the interpretation of 370. I think touching 371 is something which we should get into in these proceedings.
And particularly once, as a constitutional principle, the Solicitor General is informing us that the government has no such intent. Why should we apprehend that, this is what the government is about to do in other parts of the country?
Your
That's
lordship,
not before us, and I don't think we should really enter into that terrain at all.
Your Lordship, may I respectfully point out, you're absolutely correct, with regard to the
broader impact of, say, the abrogation of a state into a union territory, what could be the fallout in other parts of the country? Certainly that point has been made, that's present to our mind. But let's not now place specific focus on Northeast, that you will probably do this in the Northeast. I think the apprehension is allayed by the statement which has been made on behalf of the government. And beyond what was argued by the petitioners, namely that if you permit, and that is independent of Jammu and Kashmir, if you permit the abrogation of a state and its constitution into a union territory, why would it be confined only to Jammu and Kashmir? That point has been made. We have made a note of that. We will be hearing on the response to them.
Tiwari, just one. I think as far as the other parts of Northeast is concerned, because your written submission specifically talk about it. That, in view of the statement made, I don't think we are required to go into all that. One. Number two, as far as Article 3 and 4, whatever is there, if you have any submissions to make, just confine to those articles, the horse Northeast, that's possible. But otherwise, we are dealing with only 370 and the Article 3 and 4.
Your Lordship, I am extremely cognizant of what has fallen from your Lordships. And I will try and confine my arguments to the constitutional interpretation, primarily because you were absolutely correct that while Article 370 has a subheading as a temporary or transitional provision, 371 and the rest of the provisions also have a subheading as a special provision. So therefore, I am not trying to equate temporary, which has been argued as permanent, with special provisions, but the underlying principle of autonomy, which runs through 370 and 371, is the same. And that's the limited argument that I want to make. So, Your Lordship, before I go on to the arguments with regard to the Article 3 and 4, may I very respectfully point out that
Mr. Tiwari, there are even certain special provisions with respect to state of Maharashtra also. State of Maharashtra and Gujarat. Why should what we are interpreting is only 370?
Your Lordship is absolutely correct, and that's why.
See, the interventionist basis is intervention only on one principle. That is 371A. Once we are not touching that, what does the interventionist have to say in this matter?
And Mr. Tiwari, ultimately, you have nothing to say on Article 370. So then why should we hear?
Your Lordship, may I just make a submission with regard to 370, and then, I will try and make a submission as your
but there's nothing that you have formulated in your submissions on 370. You have not formulated anything in your submissions on 370.
Your Lordship, there is a submission on 370 in our written submissions.
Let us read that and then we can close on that.
619 to 623 of our written submissions, Your Lordship.
With respect to different territory are different. There is no conflict. 378, one
Your Lordship,
A
may I
is different,
speak?
370A is brief.
Completely. May I, Your Lordship, may I be? Your Lordship,